Hello, students. Welcome back for another online lecture for fashion writing. I'm your professor, Julia DiNardo, and I wanted to pick up where we left off last week with going further into various forms of fashion writing. So where I left you was reading a review online from WWD on Stephen Allen and discussing some of the elements that are traditional for a review, as well as different things to consider. So let's start right there. We're going to go over some various different forms that you may do fashion writing from both the editorial side of things, as well as getting into a bit more fashion marketing, creative marketing related entities. So just to give you a quick overview of what we'll be talking about, and hopefully I'll get to all of it in this lesson. We'll be talking about picking up with the review, and so there's various kinds of reviews. We can do, a beauty review, a product review, collection review, different things of that nature. And then we'll also be talking about an interview or a profile piece, usually on a designer is a pretty standard one. And then also we'll talk about trend reports, trend forecasting, which can both be promotional from an advertorial side of things, but also editorial. And then we'll be talking about, some things that may come up if you decide to be a fashion blogger or do some blogging. So that kind of thing would, possibly be like personal style or something more informal journal style of writing. And then we also have thinking about from the magazine editorial side of things, kind of stylizing your pieces for that. Different variations of that, like 10 pieces under 100, these kind of grouping of things of that nature, and also market related pieces. So in that sense, it'll be a whole bunch of products around a theme on one page, and not much of a content or copy, but how to be succinct about that. We'll talk a little bit about the difference for writing for newspapers versus magazines. And then, of course, again, the PR marketing advertising side of writing, which delves into copywriting and the kind of opportunities and writing available for that. And then we also have some general what to wear advice column-y kind of pieces. And then within that, some kinds of things that are really popular are like splurge versus save for different kinds of pieces. So that's a quick kind of touch on the things that we're going to go over today. And then in the future, we will go into more depth per lesson with each of these things as well as you read through your writing for the fashion business book. So this is kind of the introductory jump into that. And so with that being said, you really need to make sure that your writing is on point. Your writing is where it should be for a collegiate, level course, someone at the college level. And so if you feel that there's any deficits in your writing, you're not confident about it, or you feel like it could be better, or there are things that you make mistakes, then you may or may not be privy to, I strongly, strongly encourage you to visit the Writing Center because we're going to move through a lot of different things in this class, and I expect you to be at a certain level. And, if you're not at that level, it'll be challenging. And I don't want you to have any setbacks. I want you to move along easily with us. And then eventually, if you are still making mistakes, your grade will have to reflect that, because I expect for everyone to finish this course and be proficient in their writing enough to secure a writing gig, if that's what you want to do. But that's kind of my expectation with where you'll be, and I know that we can get there. So if you're having trouble along the way, I will help you, and I'll tell you, to seek help in the Writing Center. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's something that, it's better to nip in the bud early on, and we'll go from there. So let's continue with these different ways of writing. Okay, so let's pick up with the element of the review. So this is a kind of piece that you'll do over and over and over again. It's pretty straightforward, and the elements that you need to know in order to do them, once you kind of write them down and go through the checklist, it's pretty straightforward. So let's pretend that you're going to do a review on a product, and just for simplicity's sake, let's say it's a beauty review. So I have a product here. I have this simple replenishing rich moisturizer. Let's say a publicist gave me this and they want me to write about this. So a few things that you need to think about when you get a product or you're writing for, about a product. The first thing to think about is, like, is this product a good fit for the outlet that I'm writing for, be it online, be it digital or print? Like, is this product a good fit? And so if I'm going to review this product, am I going to do a straightforward review? Am I going to do a piece just on this product, or am I going to include it in a roundup of other products that share some sort of similar feature, but I have tested out, and deemed, good enough, appropriate enough for X magazine or whatever it is? And so when talking about this product, if you're doing a roundup especially, what is the differentiator of this product, but also make it similar to the other products that you're going to include? So with this line, simple, it says no harsh chemicals or artificial perfumes or dyes. So if you're writing about it, that might be the main line that you try to find amongst other products, and include all products that are more kind, gentler to the skin, less ingredients, less chemicals kind of thing. Or it can be really rich, creamy moisturizers if that's what this product delivers on its promise and does. So there's different ways you can think about how to correlate it with others. If you're going to do a straightforward review on this product, let's say, you have to think as you would think from the mind of the consumer. So what are the things that I need to share with my reader, or the reader of the magazine or my piece, that may be essential information? So taking a face moisturizer as an example, what could be essential information that a potential buyer or reader of the publication would want to know about this? So since you guys can't really respond since it's a video, I'll continue on. So the things that you would need to know are basically what it is and what it does. Probably how much of it you're getting. So here it's 4.2 fluoride ounces. How much it costs, where it can be bought. So those are the nuggets of information that are very important. The name of the product, exactly as it should be. So this is simple, sensitive skin experts replenishing rich moisturizer. It's its full name. What it does, it doesn't have any harsh chemicals. It works for 12 hours. That's what the packaging tells me. How much it is. So let's say it's $4.99 suggested retail, and where you can buy it. So usually when you get a product, especially from a publicist or a brand, it'll be accompanied with a press release about that product. So then it'll outline, it'll have the price, it'll have special factors about it, as well as what where you can buy it, all the options where it can be bought, both in store and online. So for the most part, when you're doing a product review in a professional setting, you don't really have to do much digging to find out about it. More than likely, you'll receive a press release that via electronically or delivered with the product that will get you all the information that you need. So it's really helpful. But then I've seen people who have basically taken the press release and published it pretty much verbatim. Now, in the journalistic editorial world, that is a big no-no. You can do that, the publicists I'm sure don't really mind, but it's really not a good practice as far as writing goes. So you want to make sure that you customize, you embellish, you romanticize language, you cut things out, that aren't really appropriate for your audience or that important to your audience, and make it fit. So it's great to have the information provided for you, but it's just like being in school that you don't want to plagiarize anything. If anything, you paraphrase it, to the best of your ability, and you work within the parameter or space of words that you're allotted in order to create this kind of piece. So I have another product here, the Blush Nudes Maybelline, which is a new eye shadow palette that's coming out, or actually just came out this summer. And it's an updated palette from last season's palette that has new colors to it, and it's shows on the back how to kind of create different eye looks. So those are all things that you would want to mention in an article. Yes, this may have been out before, but no, it's new and improved, and its formula and its colors, what makes it a little bit different. Again, how much is it? Where can you find it? And if it's limited edition, how long it might be around for, something like that. So the product review, very important. Another iteration of that is that you may have seen, that on YouTube or on blogs is like a shopping haul, where people talk about different products that they bought and where they bought them and the good and bad of them and all that stuff. So it started off about 5 years ago as a trend, and it really hasn't gone away. So people are kind of voyeuristic, and they like to kind of know what other people are doing and trying and shopping and deals, bargains, things like that. And so it's a little bit tricky when you're writing about it because these things can sell out. It can move, quickly off the shelves, and so timing is everything. Depending on the kind of publication that you're writing for, you may or may not want to do these kind of pieces. If you're writing for a blog or a daily newspaper in which it's like instantaneous information that it can go up pretty much right away and that it still be relevant the next day, just in time, then that's great. So just, again, think about the content and the context in which it's going to be delivered, and if that kind of piece or that product is appropriate. So, moving on, other kinds of reviews. So we talked about at the end of the last unit doing a collection review. So you have to include certain information. Of course, being in the city, can't help the sirens. Sorry about that. So you have to include certain information when you do a fashion show review. It should have a little bit of a backstory on the brand or the designer. It should review the collection that was presented and talk about the overall motif or theme of that collection, as well as highlighting one or two key pieces that really epitomize that collection. And especially if the collection kind of took two different turns, which oftentimes happens, where the first part is different and the second part, the first part is a gradual build up towards the second part, or the, theme kind of shifts from more sportswear to evening wear, something like that. So you have to be cognizant of and note these changes. So you have that. We also have the overall silhouettes that you want to reference in a collection. And then we also have within that, the different fabrications used and how they were used in reference to the silhouettes, which you guys are all familiar with. Textiles 101, I imagine, and can identify, different kinds of materials like boucle and jacquard and things like that. So that's where, your knowledge really comes into play, because yes, you might have a run of show that has this kind of information listed for you, but then you might not, and you might just, with your naked eye, have to identify what it is. And if you have a nice vocabulary and history of fashion knowledge, then boom, done, you're good. So, so that kind of information, and then you definitely want to include what you think about it. So if you think this collection is amazing, or it's really an ode to, the best of the designer's signature looks, say it, but back it up. Give a sentence or two and back up why you feel you love the collection or you want to trash the collection. And so just be prepared too, that you will have to talk a little bit about that, especially if it's a negative review, that you may get feedback and comments about that. So make sure that anything that you say, positive or negative, has validity and an explanation, as to why you believe this way or that way. And so having a nice, strong foundation of fashion knowledge, again, helps this, as well as honing in your writing skills. So, moving forward, moving a little bit on from the review. So we have product review, we have collection review. There's many different iterations we can do on that kind of standard, but review is a really, really big thing to kind of nail down. So to kind of, have a good sense of the formula for that early on is important. Moving on. We have the interview or profile piece. And so you'll see these done a lot on a person, of note, a designer, a socialite, an icon of some sort. And so things to think about when formulating your interview piece. One is that you have to have questions in advance. So if you are, let's say, doing an interview over the phone, be prepared to have your questions, but also to have some allowance for some alteration. So and also in person too, if the interview starts to go in a different direction, you're going to want to be prepared and to maybe ask a little bit more about that particular subject that it might veer off into, and to kind of go with it. And sometimes those are the best interviews when the unexpected happens. And so if you do an interview over the phone, one, make sure that if it's possible you can record it so that you can listen again and again, and make sure that you transcribe it perfectly. The other is you want to make sure that you can type and interact as quickly as you would almost in real time, face to face. So if you feel like those elements aren't something that you can comply with, then don't do an interview over the phone. Best always is to do an interview in person, because then you really get a more of a feel for the personality, the characteristics of that person, and you can include those elements into your interview. So if you've read an interview, of a celebrity or designer or something in magazines like Vogue or Elle, they almost always, like 99% of the time, start off with setting the tone by, let's say that the interviewer met the interviewee at a restaurant. So they'll talk about their first impressions of that celebrity, walking up to the restaurant and sitting down, and the first few things that they said, and what they're wearing, and what kind of mood they were in, and their skin was glowing, and they had on huge hoop earrings that really match their skin tone, and just adds an extra element and also a standard protocol to kind of setting up the interview to be able to have these observations that you wouldn't be able to if you do an over the phone interview. But again, going into an interview of that nature, you have to be prepared. You have to, have a recording device of some sort. Having it just recording in your phone is perfectly sufficient. Something like that, and going with it. So the other kind of interview you can do is, of course, via email. So again, you designate all of your questions. Usually you have to go through a third party, like a publicist, who filters the questions onto the subject. And so it's always a good rule of thumb to check in with the publicist and to see if there are any subjects that are, not allowed to be discussed, or anything that's coming up that would be good to discuss, and to set a realistic time frame. So if there's anything that you're putting out there that you need to get answers back, responses, quotes, you always, always, always have to build in a buffer time. So for example, let's say I'm sending questions to Reese Witherspoon, and my deadline is Friday. I sent the questions last week. I would never, ever, ever tell, a publicist, celebrity, that my deadline is Friday. I would tell them my deadline is Tuesday, because 9 times out of 10, people are busy, especially with high-profile folks. They're traveling. They're not necessarily on a time schedule, and I hate to break it to you, but they might not necessarily even be the ones answering the questions. It may be their publicist who's answering them on behalf of, the celebrity, the designer, and getting them back to you. So take it all with a grain of salt. This is just kind of how things go. But always allow buffer time into your deadlines in order to always meet them. It's the same with schoolwork. You always want to make sure you anticipate more time than you need because you never know what'll happen. So same thing goes with deadlines. Always make sure if you need to get anything back from anybody, quotes, an image, what have you, let them know as soon as possible that you need it, and let them know that you need it way sooner than you actually do. Just kind of an unspoken industry rule. So that way you'll never really be late for your deadlines, and if you are, it's your fault. So moving forward, if you do an interview via email, make sure that you have selected a nice range of questions that touch on a variety of aspects, and also you have to make sure that you cater them towards your demographic, towards whoever your reader is, what they're interested in, what they would like to hear, because otherwise, why even do the interview? So make sure that you are targeting those questions in a manner that are intriguing towards the reader. And when you formulate those questions and send them off, please make sure that they're all spell checked, that everything's correct. You spell, the name of the celebrity designer correctly, and that also you have. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. So make sure you spell those things correctly, and that also that you allot for questions that may not be answered, or they may not be answered well. So for example, let's say I'm doing an interview and I really only need, 10 questions and responses. I may send 13 or 14 just because I know that not everything everyone says all the time is quotable and enlightening and distinctive and interesting. So plan on, again, having a buffer built in of a few extra questions that you might not necessarily need or have space for, but you have them just in case the answers that you get kind of suck. So make sure that you do that, because sometimes designers, if you ask something, it's the same as our discussion board. If I ask you guys something that is a yes or no response, some people will just say yes or no. They won't really say yes because blah 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 blah. Oh yes, absolutely. Da 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 da. So try to avoid questions that have a direct yes or no answer. And if you can, build two questions into one. So for example, I might say, can you tell me what might have been your earliest influence as a fashion designer? And then, part two of that question might be, at what stage in your life and your career did you feel that it came full circle with this? So then you definitely have to get them thinking, you get more and more out, and then they're more open to the conversation. So it's always good to think of ways that you can ask questions that are interesting, personal, insightful, and will give you more than a yes or no answer. So a profile piece can have elements of an interview built into it, and usually with a profile piece, it's more where you take the questions that you may have asked and you make them more into paraphrasing. So a profile is kind of like a review in the sense that you have to have those major elements. You have to have kind of a backstory, the past of kind of, the designer and what they stand for, and maybe where they're from and what influenced them. You have to have what they're up to now and what they're looking forward to in the future. But in the meanwhile, you kind of buffer and you make it robust and enhance it with their actual quotes. And so you interject that within your piece at times that it makes sense. And then also you enhance this. You can do the same thing with an interview by using block quotes. So block quotes are whenever you read an article and you see kind of in bigger font, a certain line that might kind of be statement making or eye catching. That's something that you would put in block quotes. And so it's a popular technique to kind of build engagement. It's kind of thinking about the headlines on magazines as you're checking out at the grocery store and what kind of catches your eye. Block quotes kind of serve the same purpose within a piece. So you want to be on the lookout for block quotes and maybe use those things that are more quotable and inject them within quotation marks within a profile piece. But things that a designer says that's not really so revolutionary, you can just kind of paraphrase. So let's say I'm talking about Giorgio Armani, and I say, like Armani, has opened up 50 stores in the US in the past decade. And Armani says that his most prized possession out of all of them is his Armani Ristorante, housed within his flagship store in New York City on 54th and 5th Avenue. So if Armani said, I love the Armani Ristorante, it's my favorite thing in New York that I've created under my brand, as a quote, it's not that interesting. That's great, good to know, but it's not the most revolutionary thing that maybe he said in the piece. So if you try to build that in within the profile and make it a paraphrase instead of an actual quote, the piece can seamlessly move along, and then you can leave room for actual quotes in quotes that are a little bit more profound. So I hope that all makes sense. And we'll be moving along. So let's go on to the next element. So continuing on, let's talk about the trend forecast piece. So when you talk about a trend or do a trend report, there's a few different elements that you may want to address. And so it's important to think about where you kind of get your information, where you feel these things are happening, how they're happening, and again, if it's the right medium for you to share them in. So when we're talking about a trend piece, a trend forecast, or trend report, there's a few things that you can think about. One is this trend happening right now? Or do you have an inkling that this trend is going to happen soon? Has there been some evidence of it? And then what you can do from that point forward is use some reputable sources to kind of back up your trends. And so there's plenty of companies that make a mint off of trend forecasting. One is the Doniger Group, which is quoted all the time. And so if you search, the databases on WWD, you're going to find a wealth of information, quotes from the Doniger Group that relate to trends. So that's one resource for you. And then another resource is thinking about color. So color is very important. People always want to know whenever, Fashion Week happens, they want to say, what are the trends? What are the colors? So those are the things that you need to keep tabs on. And the foremost color authority is Pantone. The head of Pantone, Leatrice Eisman, has been at the helm of it for a number of years now, and she's highly quotable, so you can find quotes from her all over the place. But also the Pantone universe, their website, has downloadable color reports, and they give you all this information, and it can be up to several years in advance that they've predicted what colors will be hot. And they look at a lot of elements that are important that also mimic the way that you would think about when you do fashion writing. So they think about sociological elements, political elements, kind of the climate, the kind of the voice of the people, what's happening, where it's happening. They look at, current trends, where the colors are, and they predict how they'll evolve. So they think maybe they'll get brighter, lighter, completely move in a different direction. They scour the world, they scour designers, they, have all these measurements of kind of predicting what colors they think will be, in. And designers really do look to Pantone as well to kind of figure out, color schemes and inspiration and things like that. So it's a great resource and very fun and cool to look at. So that's probably something that you'd also want to reference if you're doing a trend report, is to kind of see what Pantone says and what they've predicted to be hot colors for the season, the upcoming seasons, etc. And so just taking from the Wall Street Journal, their off-duty section for the weekend, which coincidentally has a tune into podcasts, and it talks about like how hot podcasting is right now. And so I've created a few lessons for you guys that are all voice kind of podcasty. So look at me, I'm ahead of the trends. So anyways, just to show you guys a few different kinds of pieces. So this piece, belts, not such a cinch. So in this trend report, it's a little bit different, but the author Meenal Minstry talks about how belts, particularly for women, are a little bit more of a specific set and how they're a little bit harder to find and define. But she feels that, it's definitely going to become a hotter category. So it's a hypothesis, it's an inkling. And then she goes on to show belts on the runway, on celebrities, kind of how they've been worn and stuff, just to kind of give an indicator as to how this new trend in belts will kind of purvey, kind of come out. And so it's important too to have examples of things, especially visually. And so they say that, it's not a trend until it comes in threes. And so if you see a belt on 3 people, I guess that means it's a trend, right? Well, not exactly, but it's a fun kind of rule of thumb. So anyways, so here's one piece that kind of gives you the prediction that this is kind of what's going to be happening. And then we have another piece. Let me just fold this here. Okay. So something like this is the suited up silicone exec. So it kind of takes some key elements, like a blazer, a suit, and then it builds around that trend piece. So it's kind of like more of like a market piece in a magazine, where it kind of gives you all the elements that you need to kind of shop that trend. So here it is, it kind of builds the layers around that particular look. And then this kind of does the same thing. So it takes the trend, this is called Reborn to Run, and it says here, a repost to over-designed gym clothes classic gear staging a comeback. So it has some different kinds of sports gear. So this is like more of a larger, more generic theme, and then it gives specific pieces to kind of fit into that. So you definitely want to think on the approach that you have to a trend piece and how you can enhance it to make it more than just what you think is big and what you think will be big. So again, involving a trend authority, quoting them, involving a designer or brand and quoting them that might be part of this trend, or kind of pioneering this trend. Very important to incorporate into trend pieces. And then like that first piece, it takes on belts, it takes that trend and then it shows you how to wear it, so how to make it part of your life. So then it's also a mix of some personal style elements and advice, as well as trends. And so that's a very important element and thing that you want to convey. And it's the manner in which you want to do it, which is very important. In blogging, there's a lot of talk of personal style, and so it wraps up in aspiration, inspiration, and hopefully emulation. Some bloggers just throw out photos with very little context, and some set up more of a story. And then they almost always have information as to where you can shop the item. So again, having information as to where you can buy things, links you can click, that they work properly, and the item's still in stock is very, very important. So continuing on with this element of, advice, shopping. It's another kind of piece that you want to do is like what to wear. That falls under advice columns. And then, for example, taken again in the Wall Street Journal, Terry Agins has a column where she answers readers' questions every week about I have a summer wedding coming up. It's summer cocktail attire. What does that exactly mean for me? I'm a 40-year-old woman. Stuff like that. So, I think that everyone always wants to know what to wear. They always want advice. They want to know what works with their body type. They want to know what the trends are, how to wear them, how to pair them. That's kind of classic fashion writing pieces that will never get old. And so, again, depending on your reader and where you write for, will determine what kind of pieces you write. You have to be careful about the language that you use, not being too, inclusive or exclusive. For example, I mentioned crop tops in the last, in the podcast, in the audio lecture before, but there was recently upheaval because in Oprah Magazine, the Oprah Magazine, there was an advice column kind of with different ways to kind of wear and pair the crop top. And it said something like, the reader question was like, should I wear a crop top? And the author responded, and it was published like, only if you have a flat stomach can you bear your midriff. If you don't, you should dress in layers. And so this caused an uproar because he's basically saying, like, if you don't have a flat stomach, you have no right in wearing a crop top. So people really got mad, took to social media. It was like hashtag rock the crop, and people, women of all shapes and sizes, were rocking crop tops and posting them. And so, it was kind of like, how can you say something so absolute, and say that like only one kind of body type can wear this? So it's very offensive to a lot of people. It made its rounds on the internet. People were really upset about it. There was apologies that were issued, and it was kind of a big deal. So I think that, within this realm of giving advice of what to wear, you have to be sensitive. It's hard to give absolutes because everyone's body type is so different. So you have to leave allowances for that in options for people. And I think that, a lot of readers may or may not know, as far as dressing goes, what might be standard etiquette, but they don't want to feel less confident in their bodies and who they are. So it's a very fine line when giving advice, as to how to say, do this, don't do that, but not make it offensive to people. And so as you start to practice, doing your writing exercises, it's important to work on your language and your delivery of these things. And it also will help mature your writing. The more you kind of think about ways of expressing things, for your audience that can be received well. So continuing along, we have splurge versus save kind of pieces, which is a continuation of like advice and what to wear. So splurge versus save kind of starts to fit under more of like the market aspect of editorial and publications. People really, really want to know what they can get and that they can get it for a bargain. So that's something, I think, just in our human nature, that we want to always feel like we're getting an awesome deal on things, right? So it's important to consider what kind of brands your reader will shop and be into. And so the best way of finding that out is to read the publication that you're writing for and to understand who the audience is and what kind of things they're into. There's a lot of demographics published about magazine readership that goes out to advertisers and can easily be accessible by the public. It talks about like what areas of the country their readership is mainly from, what's their average household income, all these things. And so all these elements you'll want to consider, because if you are writing and your readership loves Old Navy, but you're writing about Hermes, might not be a good match. It really might not resonate with your readers. However, if you show something that is Hermes, but Old Navy does like a really good imitation of it or something that looks awesome, then you might want to tell them that, because then that might make it's affordable, it's approachable, it's a great option. So remember, when you do splurge versus save, that the splurge range and the save range are still something that your reader is familiar with, and will actually buy. So moving on, just trying to see what else I wanted to talk to you guys about. So I talked briefly about magazine editorial pieces and market pieces. So with a market kind of piece, basically what that means is that, let's say it's lipsticks, and the theme is like purple lipsticks. So there'll be like 20 different kinds of different brands of purple lipstick on the page, and like there'll be like a catchy headline and then a subhead, so like another headline below that, and maybe a sentence that talks about the trend of purple lipsticks, with a range of different colors and shimmers and mattes of lipstick that fit into that genre. And so these kind of pieces are absolutely trend pieces, but they rely more heavily on the visual element than the written. And so if you think you're off the hook from the writing side of it, actually you're not. What that really means is that you have to actually make sure that every word counts, because we only get a few words to really talk about this story. And so it makes it even more important that you get to the point quickly and you convey it in a way that your readers will be receptive, and they get it, and they get exactly what you're talking about and have all that they need to know in like 15 words. So this can be really, really tricky, and you may write what you're going to write for this 15 times before you land on the perfectly succinct formulation. And so these kind of market pieces are something that you see, that also can be on the advertorial side of things, in advertising and things like that. And so it's an excellent skill to hone in, because writing in school, you have to be a little bit more verbose and write until you hit a certain page number. But in the world of, fashion writing and editorial, it's really not about that. It's more about saying what you want to say and say it in an engaging way, but getting to the point relatively quickly. It's not really about length any longer, especially when you're writing, for a magazine, when there's, just so much column and space, or you're writing online when attention spans are much shorter. So these are important things to think and keep in mind. So the last bit that I wanted to talk about, which I started to go into with the copywriting element of things, is the PR marketing, advertising side of writing. And so this is tremendously important. It just emphasizes the fact that no matter what side of fashion you're going to go into, that you're always going to have to deal with writing. You're always going to be expected to be able to write and edit and do it well. So you might as well just accept that fact and perfect your writing now, so that whenever you start, your jobs or do your internships, that skill really shines, and your boss will find you more than adequate at this task. So with the PR marketing advertising side of things, there's different kinds of writing that you'll have to do. On the PR side of things, you'll have to do pitches. So you'll have to do pitches, kind of proposals for new business to your clients. And then you'll also have to do pitches to to journalists, bloggers, media about your clients. And so you want to make sure that when you send these emails, these correspondences, that everything is super tight. It's perfect. Everything's spelled right. The formatting is good. The images that you've used are perfectly in line, and that there are zero mistakes, because any kind of mistake in this writing will directly reflect on you, as a publicist, your publicity firm, as well as the brand. So it can be quite detrimental. It's very important that you keep these things really well edited. And to that point, you also want to keep them creative. I can tell you that I some days get literally 200 emails a day, and like at least 80-90% of those are pitches from publicists. And so half the time I just go like this: delete, 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 just go down the line. But if somebody sends something that has an interesting subject line, so like a header, like a title, that you have to think about, that catches my attention, I will click and I'll open it. Or if I see that it's comes from a publicist that I know represents, good clients, and her communications or his communications are clear and concise, I'll open it. And so, when you convey a message, if you're promoting a particular product or working with a theme, like for example, with Labor Day coming up, I might be getting a lot of pitches for like Labor Day product roundups and things like that, which can get, or the holidays, it can get really monotonous and boring. And, what makes one product stand out from the rest? I mean, it's all in the approach. It's just like you would take writing any kind of piece, for editorial, that you translate that for promotional purposes. So it's finding correlations between products. So that would be between like brands, between your clients. It's emphasizing their importance, what makes them distinct, what makes them different. So it's really not that much different than writing editorial pieces, because you have to, know your demographic, you have to be targeted, you have to be personable to a certain extent. So it's very important to understand the brand and kind of nail these things down. And so, along with that, whenever you do reach out to members of the press, perhaps they attend an event, you send them some product or, a release on a product. Again, you have to make sure that you know the elements that need to be included in a press release. So, generally, no more than a page maximum. You have a background on the brand itself, information about the product, bulleted points that are highlights of it, where to buy, how much it costs, when it's coming out, as well as when this information can become public. So usually they have a release date, and it'll say for immediate release, which means myself as a journalist receiving it can write about it at any point, or it'll have a date, or it'll say embargo, which means you cannot share any of this information or images until a certain date. So it's important to kind of look out for these things. And so that is, as well written as any kind of review, really, because that's information that you're weaning from for your reviews as a journalist. Going more into the marketing side, you might be compiling PowerPoint presentations or slides or things of that nature that relate to, your firm or a client in order to get bigger business. And so again, you have to have things concise, well written, and to the point. On the advertising side of things, there's a few different ways in which you can work for brands, for magazines, that your writing skills will come in handy. Trust me, I've done it. It's a great way to gain experience. It pays very well. So it's something that you may want to pursue. We can talk about that more. But on the advertising side, you can be working for a magazine, and brands will have you, as a person who works at the magazine, write the ads for them, because they figure your reader, and you can communicate the message best to them. So in order to do that, you obviously have to get, deliverables from the brand, what the product is, what they expect, what the stats are, on this advertorial page or the ad, or things like that, and include all that information. But then you have some creative reign to create content that's eye-catching. You can do the same kind of thing, like you can work for a department store like Saks or Bloomingdale's, and or J. Crew, and you create the catalog for them. Or if they have a book, like Bergdorf Goodman has a beautiful book that is a compilation of really well-written editorial pieces with kind of market and more ad style promotions of their products. So it can be something like that that you're working on. So it really depends on where you work and who the client is, and or if there's multiple ones. And so sometimes in that end, the writing gets broken into two parts. So there'll be a team that works on the creative side of things, and then there'll be a team that works on the technical. So what's the difference between creative and technical if you're kind of working on the advertising side anyway, right? Well, the difference is the technical side team will be the ones that deal with the specs. So any kind of specifications or hard facts, they're the ones that do it. So, for example, when you're looking in a catalog and it has like maybe this much of text in the bottom left, right, or upper left or upper right, and it has like the name of the product, so it might be like favorite tank top, and then it'll say the price, and it'll say the size range and the colors available and the style number and like in-store only or online only. That's the technical team who writes that. Then if you have the creative team, they're the ones who write like the splashy headlines and subheadlines that'll be like favorite tank in stock. Now you can get your favorite, tank top in 6 luscious colors, or something like that, or something hopefully more creative than what I just came up with off the top of my head. But anyways, you guys get the picture. So depending on how big the company is, it can be broken into two sides. And so if you decide to go, in this direction with your career, you can decide if you want to be more on one side or the other. Other kinds of writing, marketing promotions that are extremely important are newsletters. So pretty much every company, every brand, every store sends out newsletters, mostly daily, sometimes multiple times a day, and it clogs your inbox. But every single day, those brands are thinking of catchier and catchier ways to get your attention so that you click and look at their emails and hopefully click through and shop at their stores. So there are people behind those emails who every day, come up with a new headline that's, the subject for the email that'll hopefully entice people to click through and buy. So it's an important part of marketing. Another part, of the advertising side of things are any sort of signage. So like in-store signage on racks or in the windows, or any sort of, little postcard like mailers that go out if you have like a credit card to Banana Republic. Maybe once a month you'll get a little mailer from the company trying to get you to come back, and there'll be like a 30% off sale or something. But all that stuff, all those materials are written by somebody. And so that all falls under writing. It falls under fashion. It's under the retail spectrum. So it can be something that you can get a job doing. And you may start off with that, or you may somehow make your way into that. But it's important to have writing skills because these are measures that every company uses, and it's not going away anytime soon. So that's kind of the range of things thus far, an overview, and we'll get into it more shortly. So thanks for listening. I am Professor Julia DiNardo, and I will see you soon in class. Thanks. Signing out.